Hello, my name is Clive and I am gender fluid. Quite often that in the past especially has involved cross-dressing and associating with a sort of female gender. I don't want to transition or have a sex change, although of course there are many on this what is a very broad spectrum who do and who go through with that very major life decision. It's certainly not something that anyone would go about lightly, of course. So I wanted in this very brief video to try and explain myself a little bit, and perhaps others who share my condition, if that's the right word, can relate to some of this. And I'm hoping it might be helpful, especially for those of you who are trying to understand this. Perhaps you're a partner or someone working with someone who is pangendered or transgendered and just really puzzling over what this is all about. I don't think I can give the complete answer. I can only really relate to my own experiences, and as I say, it's quite a broad field. However, I think there is a lot of misconception, understandably, because if this isn't something that you yourself feel compelled to do, then how can you begin to understand it? Certainly in the culture that I grew up in the UK, not quite so much these days, but certainly in previous decades, there was a view that men should be men and women should be women, and anybody who went around cross-dressing was either living out some sort of childlike fantasy of play acting, or was in some ways, to put it in inverted commas, less than a man. I think that is a very prejudiced view, even if it is one that's understandable, and happily times are changing and there's much more education now in the world that we live in. For me, actually, it's got a lot to do with qualities within, feelings, emotions that we might express as masculine or feminine, and how you put labels on those is a question for discussion in its own right. But I suppose things like compassion and intuition and fluency, creativity even, we might tend to think of as being feminine, gentleness. And there's something for me that when I am allowing those qualities in a personality that is, in my expression, feminine predominantly in presentation to come out, and I'm helped by dressing and presenting in a feminine way to express that I feel a lot of comfort. For me as a gender fluid person, that is by no means how I want to be all the time. In fact, there are certainly many occasions when I am very comfortable in my male self and don't want to or need to express the feminine. But I do believe it's helped me actually, rather than being less than a person, to be more whole, because I am actually integrating what is masculine and feminine within me. We all have different ways of doing that, and we don't all have to be on this kind of central gender spectrum in order to do that. But for me, there is a part to play, a very strong part to play in expressing this personality. So does sex drive come into it, sexual arousal and so on? Well, sometimes yes, it has for me. But I think that's more to do with the kind of energy that's being aroused within you. Very, very difficult to describe that and pin it down, and I'm still discovering what's going on there. But yes, there can be great pleasure involved with this. It's not usually associated with sexual orientation. In fact, most people who describe themselves as cross-dressers aren't gay, for example, which might be a fairly common misconception, or at least has been in the past. Some are bisexual. There is as broader grouping, I would imagine, among transgender, cross-dresser, gender fluid people in terms of their sexual orientation as there is for the population at large. So it's not primarily about that. Those who do transition, who do have this sense, the cliche always is, I feel trapped in the wrong body, and they can't live really otherwise satisfactorily unless they transition, generally speaking, will want to form relationships with the opposite gender after they've transitioned, but in no way see themselves as being gay. And clearly, I think most of us could see that there's quite a big difference there. It's not about biology generally. I mean, certainly there can be a sense of what is it like to inhabit a masculine or a feminine body, and some curiosity and intrigue around that. Again, some people will have a stronger interest in that than others. But primarily things like dress and presentation and gender are what we in society create, and they are associations, very powerful associations formed with those things that help us not necessarily identify, but believe that we are projecting that particular person, that, be it feminine or masculine. So I think there's something, again, about association that's very powerful. When I'm wearing a dress, for example, somehow I'm obviously very conscious of that. It allows the feminine within me to come up and express herself more. But in a different world, in a different time, in a different place, there'd be no reason why wearing a dress would be associated with being feminine. And in fact, in the past, things like pink and blue have had completely different associations with gender to what they have now. So gender is quite a complex topic. It does have something to do with identity, but it also has something to do with association. And I think it's the association that when someone is wanting to express their feminine nature, for example, in the case of a male to female, cross-dresser, pangendered person, it is association primarily rather than identity. If they are set upon transitioning, or as to some extent I am, really exploring their gender identity and how presenting in different ways helps them relate to the world, then perhaps that's not the case. Perhaps it is more about identity. But I don't think it's such a simple matter. So one of the other aspects of this, and this is particularly relevant perhaps for partners and family, those who are close to someone who comes out as being transgendered or a cross-dresser or pangendered, is that almost always, I believe, it has nothing to do in terms of projecting on to the ones that they love. I don't think that most people's feelings would be in any way changed to a person that they are in love with. So it's not about wanting to change roles or anything of that nature primarily, although of course in a very intimate relationship, things like role-playing and allowing this expression to be entertained, as it were, to be expressed by dressing up or whatever, would be very common, just to give that person, the transgender person, space and an opportunity to do that in a relationship they trust. It actually takes quite a lot of courage to come out. So it's not really for people who are of a weak disposition. Obviously there remains a lot of prejudice and ostracism and false impressions. So I think it's something to embrace and celebrate, and in a world where diversity brings colour, is not something to be particularly ashamed of, or to be ashamed of at all, I would say. I come from quite a religious background, so I went through quite a period of trying to reconcile this with my religious beliefs. I won't go into that now, but I'm very comfortable that I've been able to do that. So I think, to try and sum up, this is quite a broad area. People have different reasons why they need to express themselves in their masculine and feminine ways, and the associations they make through dress. Generally speaking, things like sexual orientation, certainly. For cross-dressers, the desire to be a man or a woman, and a lot of the things that might be believed about it actually aren't necessarily true. So if you are in a relationship with a partner who has come out and you're trying to understand this, I hope that this might have helped you a little bit. There's plenty more support on the internet and elsewhere, and in my blog I try to articulate some of my own experiences and my own reflections. They're not going to apply to everybody, but they may be useful to help understand this very common, actually, condition a little more. Thank you.